The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky campus of the Galactic Engineering Academy on Kepler 442b. The air shimmered with heat even though it was still early. This planet was known for one thing, its deadly volcanic activity. That was exactly why the Academy chose this place for their most difficult tests. Kim Taeho walked slowly toward the main lecture hall. His boots made soft sounds on the metal walkway. Around him, students from dozens of different worlds hurried to their classes. Some floated above the ground on anti-gravity belts. Others moved on multiple legs or slithered across the floor. Taeho was one of only 12 humans at the Academy this year. The lecture hall was huge. It could hold 500 students easily. Taeho found his usual seat near the back. He liked to watch and listen before speaking. That was something his grandmother had taught him back on Earth. Listen first, speak second, she always said. Professor Veltar entered the room with his usual dramatic flair. The alien stood nearly 3 meters tall. His body was made of living crystal that caught and scattered light in beautiful patterns. When he moved, tiny chimes seemed to ring in the air around him. His species came from Quartzheim, a world where everything was made of different types of stone and crystal. Students, Professor Veltara's voice echoed through the hall. It sounded like wind blowing through a cave. Today we begin your final examination. This test will separate the truly advanced minds from the primitive ones. His crystal eyes seemed to look directly at the human students when he said the word primitive. Taeho felt several of his classmates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Professor Veltar waved his hand, and a holographic map appeared in the center of the room. It showed a vast area of red and orange terrain. Steam rose from cracks in the ground. Rivers of glowing lava moved slowly across the landscape like burning snakes. This is Pyroclastic Valley, the professor continued. It stretches for 50 kilometers between our current location and the mineral extraction site you must reach. The surface temperature ranges from 1200 to 1500 degrees Celsius. The air itself can melt most organic materials. Valkyrie student in the front row raised one of her 4 arms. Her species was known for their natural heat resistance. Professor, surely this is a simple matter of thermal protection and efficient transport? Professor Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. Indeed, for properly evolved species. However, we have diverse participants this year. Again, his gaze fell on the human students. Taeho looked around the room. Near the middle, he spotted Yoon Hae-ri. She was another Korean student specializing in xenobiology. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was taking careful notes on her tablet. 2 rows ahead sat Park Min-soo, a structural engineer who had helped Taeho with several projects before. The rules are simple, Professor, Veltar announced. You must cross the valley and retrieve a sample from the extraction site. You may work alone or in teams of up to 8 members. You have 72 hours to complete the journey. Any method is acceptable, provided you arrive alive and with the sample. A Zephyrian student phase shifted slightly, becoming translucent. Professor, for those of us with natural phasing abilities, this seems quite straightforward. Perhaps, Professor Veltar replied. But remember, the extraction site is protected by quantum-locked barriers. You must be fully solid to interact with the equipment. The professor gestured again, and the hologram zoomed in on different sections of the valley. I should mention that volcanic activity has increased significantly this season. New lava vents open daily. The weather patterns are unpredictable. Taeho studied the map carefully. He noticed something that others seemed to miss. There were thin blue lines scattered across the terrain, old riverbeds and underground water sources. Most students were focused on the obvious dangers, the lava, the heat, the toxic gases, but Taeho saw something else. The expected solutions, Professor Veltar continued, involve advanced hover technology, personal force fields, or environmental suits rated for extreme thermal conditions. These approaches have been used successfully by previous classes. A student from the Crystalline Consortium raised her hand. What about students whose species lack the economic resources for such equipment? Professor Veltar's crystal body flickered, with what looked like amusement. Natural selection applies to intelligence as well as biology. Those who cannot adapt ... do not survive to graduate. The professor's words created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Tejo felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. He had learned to control his emotions during his time at the academy. Showing anger would only confirm what many aliens thought about humans, that they were too emotional. To be truly intelligent, you have 48 hours to prepare, Professor Veltar announced. Teams must be registered by tomorrow evening. The crossing begins at dawn on the third day. As students began to file out of the lecture hall, Tejo remained in his seat. He continued studying the holographic map, paying special attention to those blue lines. Water meant mud. Mud meant thermal mass. Thermal mass meant heat absorption. Tejo? Yunhei had approached his seat. Are you planning to attempt this? Tejo looked up at her. Hey, Ri was brilliant, but she often worried about taking risks. I think so, are you? I want to, but... She glanced around to make sure no other students were listening. The professor is right. We don't have natural heat resistance like the Velkari. We can't phase through matter like the Zephyrians. We don't have the economic resources for the best equipment. Park Minsu had joined them. He was a quiet person, but his engineering skills were impressive. Maybe that's not what we need, he said softly. What do you mean? Heiri asked. Minsu pointed at the holographic map. Look at how the other species approach problems. They use their natural abilities or expensive technology to overpower challenges, but humans ... we adapt. We find ways to work with what we have. Tejo smiled. Minsu understood. The valley isn't just lava and heat, it's a complete ecosystem. There are patterns, cycles, resources we could use. Like what? Heiri asked, but her tone suggested she was becoming interested rather than skeptical. Water, Tejo said simply. Underground springs, seasonal runoff, thermal vents that create steam. And where there's water on volcanic terrain, there's mineral-rich. Mud? Professor Veltar was still in the lecture hall, speaking with a group of Quartzheim students. His crystalline form caught the light from the holographic display, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. Tejo could hear fragments of their conversation. ... Primitive approaches will fail as always. ... Carbon-based limitations. ... Educational value in observing failure. Tejo stood up slowly. Let's go talk to Li So-young and Choi Woo-jin. If we're going to do this, we'll need experts in atmospheric science and materials. As they left the lecture hall, Tejo could feel Professor Veltar's crystal eyes following them. The alien professor had already decided that the human students would fail. That was fine with Tejo. Let him think that, back on Earth, humans had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, and survived in every environment on the planet. They had done it without natural armor, without the ability to fly, without crystal bodies that could withstand extreme temperatures. They had done it with intelligence, cooperation, and the willingness to work with their environment instead of fighting against it. Pyroclastic Valley was just another environment. Hot, dangerous, and deadly, but still just an environment. And humans had been adapting to hostile environments for thousands of years. The real test was about to begin. The Academy's research library was nearly empty at this hour. Most students preferred to work during the day when the artificial lighting was brighter. Tejo sat at a large table covered with data tablets, geological surveys, and atmospheric readings. The information he was studying would have bored most of his classmates, but to him it was fascinating. Li So-young arrived first. She was an atmospheric scientist who had grown up on Jeju Island, where she learned to predict weather patterns by watching clouds and wind. Her skills had translated well to alien worlds. She carried a steaming cup of tea and looked tired. You sent a message about mud? She asked, sitting down across from Tejo. At this hour? Look at this. Tejo turned his tablet toward her. The screen showed a cross-section view of Pyroclastic Valley. See these blue areas? Underground water systems? They connect to springs that surface about every 2 kilometers. So Young studied the data while sipping her tea. The thermal readings show massive temperature variations. Surface is over 1200 degrees, but these underground areas, they're much cooler, maybe 200 degrees. Exactly, and when hot volcanic soil meets cool water, you get steam, lots of steam. So Young was beginning to understand. But also mud. Thick, mineral-rich mud that can absorb and hold heat. Choi Woo-jin joined them 20 minutes later. He was a materials specialist who could identify the properties of almost any substance just by looking at it. His family had run a ceramics business for generations, so he understood how different materials reacted to heat. "Sorry I'm late," he said, settling into a chair. "I was running tests on local soil samples. You wanted to know about thermal properties?" Taeho nodded. "What did you find?" Woo-jin pulled out his own tablet and showed them his results. "The soil here is incredible. High concentrations of vermiculite, bentonite clay, and volcanic ash. When mixed with water, it creates a substance that can absorb massive amounts of heat without breaking down." "How massive?" So Young asked. "Theoretically, it could absorb enough heat to reduce surface temperatures by 300 to 400 degrees. In a localized area? But only if you could get enough water to create sufficient mud volume." The three Koreans looked at each other. The same idea was forming in all their minds. "We need more people," Taeho said finally. "Hydrological engineering, thermal dynamics, maybe robotics." Over the next 6 hours, their small group grew. Jung Hae-jin was a hydrological engineer who specialized in water management systems. She had helped design flood control systems on 3 different worlds. When Taeho explained their idea, her eyes lit up with excitement. "You want to redirect underground water flow to create controlled mud channels across 50 kilometers of active lava field?" she asked. "Is it possible?" Taeho replied. Hae-jin was quiet for several minutes, running calculations on her tablet. "It would require precise mapping of the water table, careful placement of diversion channels, and constant monitoring of flow rates. But yes, it's possible." Nam Dong-hyuk was harder to convince. As a thermal dynamics specialist, he understood exactly how dangerous their plan was. "The heat transfer calculations alone are incredibly complex," he said. "One mistake in the mud composition or water flow, and you'll create steam explosions instead of cooling." "But if we get it right?" Taeho asked. Dong-hyuk ran more calculations. "If you get it right, you could create corridors of reduced temperature. Not safe, but survivable with basic heat protection." Kang the-jin brought a different perspective. As a robotics engineer, she thought about the practical problems of implementation. How do you dig channels and place equipment in an active lava field? How do you monitor and adjust the system in real time? "Heat-resistant drones," Taeho suggested. "Small, fast, expendable. They map the optimal routes and place temporary barriers to direct water flow." Dajin smiled. "I can build those. Give me 36 hours and I'll have a dozen drones that can operate at 1500 degrees for 20 minutes each." Co. Jae-wook was the last to join their group. He was a geologist who had spent 2 years studying volcanic activity on 4 different worlds. When he heard their plan, he immediately began pointing out problems. "Lava flows are unpredictable," he said. "They change direction without warning. Your mud channels might work perfectly until a new vent opens right in your path. Then we adapt." Taeho replied. "We create backup routes, redundant systems. We plan for failure and have alternatives ready." Jae-wook studied the geological data for hours. Finally, he looked up. "It's insane," he said, "but it might work. The mineral composition is right. The water sources are positioned well. And volcanic activity follows patterns, even if those patterns are complex." Word of their project began to spread through the academy. Other students stopped by the library to see what the humans were planning. Most left shaking their heads or laughing. A group of Valkyrie students found their project particularly amusing. "Digging in dirt like primitive animals?" one of them said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Typical human solution. If you can't think your way through a problem, start digging." The Zephyrian students were more polite but equally skeptical. Your species' attachment to physical manipulation of matter is quaint, one of them commented. But surely there are more elegant approaches? Even some of the other human students expressed doubts. Why not just pool our resources and buy hover tech like everyone else? One asked. This mud channel idea seems incredibly complicated. But Teho's team continued working. Omiran joined them on the second day. As a chemical engineer, she immediately saw ways to improve their mud composition. If we add certain mineral supplements to the water, we can increase the thermal absorption capacity by another 15%, she explained. Where do we get those minerals? Hyjin asked Mir and smiled. From the lava field itself. The same thermal vents that make the area dangerous also produce exactly the minerals we need. Professor Veltar made several visits to the library during their preparation time. He never spoke directly to the human students, but he observed their work with obvious interest. Sometimes he would pause near their table and examine their calculations or equipment designs. Fascinating, he would murmur in his crystalline voice. Attempting to manipulate gross matter rather than transcend physical limitations, most primitive. But Teho noticed that the professor always stayed longer than necessary, and his crystal eyes seemed to show something beyond mere academic curiosity. Perhaps it was respect, though Teho couldn't be sure. On the evening before their departure, other student teams were making final preparations. The Velkari had purchased military-grade environmental suits. The Zephyrians had practiced their phase-shifting techniques. The Crystalline Consortium students had acquired hover platforms with advanced thermal shielding. The human team's preparation looked very different. They had assembled a collection of basic tools, simple electronics, and containers of various chemical compounds. Their equipment looked primitive compared to the advanced technology other teams were using. Are you sure about this? So Young asked as they loaded their gear. Everyone else has solutions that look much more reliable. Teho looked at his teammates. 7 other Korean students who had chosen to trust his crazy idea. They could still change their minds. They could still join other teams or attempt individual crossings with conventional methods. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days in Korea, he said. Times when people had to survive with nothing but their intelligence and willingness to work hard. They didn't have advanced technology. They had to find ways to work with nature instead of fighting against it. And, Dong-hyuk prompted, and they survived. They adapted. They found solutions that others thought were impossible. Teho picked up his pack. Tomorrow we find out if humans still remember how to do that. The other teams had already registered their official departure times. Most planned to leave at dawn when thermal activity was typically at its lowest. The human team had registered for a departure time 2 hours later. They wanted to give themselves time for final adjustments and equipment checks. As they left the library, Teho could hear other students discussing their chances. The consensus seemed to be that the humans would either fail spectacularly or find some clever way to barely survive. No one seemed to consider the possibility that they might actually solve the problem elegantly and efficiently. That was fine with Teho. Underestimation had always been humanity's secret advantage. The pre-dawn air was thick with sulfur and steam. Teho stood at the edge of Pyroclastic Valley, watching the glow of distant lava flows paint the sky orange and red. His team had been working for 3 hours already, making final preparations. While other student groups were still eating breakfast, Young Haijin knelt beside a portable water testing kit, analyzing samples from the nearest underground spring. pH levels are perfect, she called out. Mineral content is even better than our projections. The water here will create exactly the type of mud we need. 50 meters away, Kang De-jin was running final tests on her drones. The small machines looked like metal insects, each about the size of a dinner plate. Their heat-resistant coating gleamed dully in the volcanic light. All systems operational, she reported. I've got 12 drones ready for initial mapping runs. The other student teams had gathered at the official starting point. a raised platform that offered a clear view of the valley. Taeho could see them checking their equipment and making final preparations. The Valkyrie students looked confident in their environmental suits. The Zephyrians were practicing their phase shifting, becoming translucent and solid again in steady rhythms. Professor Veltar stood on the platform addressing the assembled students. His crystalline voice carried clearly across the volcanic landscape. Remember that this test measures not just your ability to solve problems, but your judgment in choosing appropriate methods. Some approaches are more civilized than others. Several students glanced toward the human team. Taeho pretended not to notice. Thermal readings are stable for now, Nam Dong-hyuk reported, studying his instruments. Surface temperature is 1210 degrees Celsius. Wind patterns suggest we have about 6 hours before the next major thermal upswing. Oh, Miron was mixing chemical compounds in a series of containers. The substances would be added to their mud mixture to increase its heat absorption properties. I need 15 more minutes to complete the catalyst preparation, she said. Lee So-young stood on a small hill, watching cloud formations and wind patterns. Weather prediction was crucial to their plan. Changes in atmospheric pressure could affect underground water flow and mud consistency. We have good conditions, she announced. Stable wind patterns for the next 4 hours, minimal thermal updrafts. Co. Jae-wook had been studying seismic readings since before sunrise. Volcanic activity created constant small earthquakes, and major tremors could disrupt their carefully planned water channels. Minor seismic activity only, he reported. No major eruptions predicted for the next 8 hours. Park Min-soo and Choi Woo-jin were assembling the channel digging equipment. It looked simple compared to the advanced technology other teams were using, but it was designed specifically for their purpose. Ready to begin excavation, Min-soo announced, the human. Team's preparation looked chaotic to outside observers. They had equipment scattered across a 100-meter area. Team members moved quickly between different tasks, constantly communicating and adjusting their plans. It looked disorganized, but every action was part of a carefully coordinated system. Group of Crystalline Consortium students approached their work area. Are you certain about this approach? One of them asked. Our projectors indicate that your mud cooling theory has only a 63% probability of success. What's the probability of success for hover platforms in these thermal conditions? Taeho asked politely. The alien student consulted his datapad. 87% under normal conditions. However, current thermal readings reduce that to 74%. And phase shifting through quantum-locked barriers? Unknown. The interaction between Zephyrian biology and quantum locks has not been extensively tested. Taeho nodded. So everyone is taking risks? We're just taking different ones. The Crystalline Consortium students exchanged glances and moved away. Taeho heard one of them comment, "Primitive risk assessment? They should trust mathematical projections over intuition." But Taeho had noticed something the aliens missed. Their mathematical projections assumed ideal conditions. Pyroclastic Valley was anything but ideal. Equipment failed in unexpected ways. Thermal readings fluctuated wildly. Underground systems behaved differently than surface measurements suggested. Humans had learned long ago that perfect plans rarely survive contact with reality. The key was building systems that could adapt and respond to changing conditions. Initial mapping run complete, the Jin announced. Her first drone had returned from a reconnaissance flight over the valley. I've identified optimal water source locations and confirmed underground flow patterns. The geological surveys were accurate. Hyjin studied the drone's data. We can tap into 3 major spring systems and redirect flow through natural channels. The existing topology will do most of the work for us. Mayron finished her chemical preparation, catalyst ready. When we add this to the mud mixture, it will increase thermal absorption by 18% and maintain consistency at temperatures up to 800 degrees. The other teams were beginning their crossings now. Taeho watched a group of Valkyrie students activate their hover platforms and glide smoothly across the lava field. Their environmental suits gleamed silver in the volcanic light. Behind them, several Zephyrian students began phase shifting, their bodies becoming ghostly and translucent as they moved through the superheated air. Show-offs, So Young muttered, but Tejo was studying their approaches carefully. The hover platforms worked well, but they required constant power and generated heat signatures of their own. The phase shifting was elegant, but it left the Zephyrians vulnerable to quantum interference from the mineral extraction equipment. Professor Veltar had positioned himself where he could observe all the student teams. His crystal eyes seemed to spend more time watching the human preparation than the other crossings. When Tejo glanced in his direction, the professor quickly looked away. "Ready to begin excavation," Minsu reported. "First channel should be completed in 30 minutes. The human team moved into action. While the Gene's drones mapped precise routes, the others began digging strategic channels to redirect underground water flow. The work was hard and dirty, exactly the kind of physical labor that other species considered beneath intelligent beings, but the channels they created were precisely engineered. Each one was positioned to maximize water flow and mud consistency. The network they were building would create a system of thermal regulation across the entire 50-kilometer crossing. "This is fascinating," a voice said behind them. Tejo turned to see Professor Veltar approaching their work area. The alien professor moved carefully, his crystal feet making soft chiming sounds on the rocky ground. "Professor," Tejo said politely, "are you here to observe our primitive methods?" Professor Veltar's crystal form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "I am here to ensure student safety. Your approach is ... unconventional." "Is that another word for primitive?" Young Haijin asked without looking up from her water flow calculations. "Perhaps," the professor admitted. "But I am beginning to wonder if primitive and ineffective are necessarily the same thing." Choi Woo-jin had been testing mud samples from their newly created channels. "Thermal absorption is exceeding projections," he announced. "The local mineral content is even better than we hoped." Professor Veltar moved closer to examine their work. "You are creating a heat exchange system using naturally occurring materials," he observed. "The mud absorbs thermal energy and transfers it to flowing water, which carries the heat away from the surface." "Exactly," Tejo said. "We're not fighting the environment, we're using it." "But surely this requires constant maintenance and adjustment?" "Your system has so many variables, so many potential failure points." Omiran looked up from her chemical mixing. "Every system has failure points, Professor. The difference is whether you design for perfection or for adaptability." The professor's crystal eyes studied their equipment and preparations. Everything looked simple and crude compared to the advanced technology other teams were using. But there was an elegance to the human approach that he was beginning to appreciate. "Your species always chooses the most complicated possible solution," he observed. "No," Tejo corrected gently. "We choose the solution that works with what we have available. Sometimes that's complicated. Sometimes it's simple, but it's always practical." In the distance, they could see the first teams reaching the halfway point of their crossing. The Valkyrie hover platforms were maintaining steady progress. The Zephyrian phase shifters were moving more slowly, having to solidify periodically to navigate around quantum interference zones. "Ready for initial test run," Haijin announced. "First mud channel is operational." The humans activated their system. Water began flowing through their carefully excavated channels, mixing with volcanic soil to create thick, mineral-rich mud. The mud flowed across predetermined paths, creating cool corridors through the superheated landscape. "Surface temperature in the mud channels is down to 400 degrees, Dong-hyuk reported. "Still dangerous, but survivable with basic protection." Professor Veltar watched in amazement as the human system transformed sections of the deadly lava field into merely hazardous terrain. "Remarkable," he murmured. "You have created localized climate control using..." The first steps onto the mud channel felt like walking on a different planet. The air above the lava field shimmered with heat that would have killed them instantly. But the mud beneath their feet remained cool enough for survival. Steam rose. Around them in thick clouds, carrying the mineral scent of volcanic soil and underground springs. "Temperature readings are stable," Nam Donyuk called out, his voice muffled by the basic heat mask they all wore. 400 degrees and holding. "Steady, the thermal absorption is working exactly as calculated." Taeho led the team forward, moving carefully but steadily along their prepared route. Behind him, Young Haijin monitored water flow rates on a handheld device. The success of their crossing depended on maintaining perfect balance between water, volume, mud consistency, and heat absorption. "Flow rate nominal," she reported. "The underground springs are providing exactly the volume we need. First channel is stable for at least the next 2 hours." 50 meters ahead, Kang the Jin's drones were already working on the next section. The small machines flew through the superheated air, their heat-resistant coating glowing red but holding up under the extreme conditions. They carried equipment to extend the mud channel system further into the valley. "Drone Alpha is placing diversion barriers now," the Jin announced through the communication system. "Beta and Gamma are mapping thermal variations ahead. I'm seeing some unexpected heat patterns about 1 kilometer forward." CO Jae-wook checked his geological instruments. "Minor seismic activity increasing. Nothing dangerous yet, but we should be prepared for changes in the landscape." They had been walking for 20 minutes when they encountered their first real challenge. A new lava vent had opened since their morning reconnaissance, creating a river of molten rock directly across their planned route. "Options?" Taeho asked. Calmly. Li So-young was already studying atmospheric patterns around the new obstacle. "Wind currents are creating a heat updraft directly above the lava flow. Surface temperature there is over 1600 degrees. Lethal even with our mud." "Cooling system." Maran examined the chemical composition of the volcanic soil near the new vent. "The mineral content here is different. Higher iron oxide, lower silicate content. Our standard mud mixture won't be as effective." But Park Min-soo had spotted something the others missed. "Look at the topology 20 meters to the east. There's a natural depression that connects to our next planned water source. If we can redirect flow through that area..." Choi Woo-jin was already analyzing soil samples from the depression. "Composition is better than our original route. Higher bentonite clay content? This could actually improve our cooling efficiency." The team adapted quickly. This was what humans did best, recognizing when plans needed to change and implementing new solutions on the spot. While other species might have seen the lava vent as a failure of their system, the humans saw it as an opportunity to improve. Their approach? "Haijin, can you redirect water flow through the eastern depression?" Taeho asked. "Give me 15 minutes, she replied, already pulling excavation tools from her pack. "I'll need to create 2 small dams and 1 connecting channel." While Haijin worked on water redirection, the others prepared the new route. Miren adjusted her chemical mixture to work better with the different soil composition. Dong-hyuk calculated new thermal absorption rates. Dajin sent drones to map the optimal path through the depression. "Professor," Veltar's voice crackled through their communication system. He was monitoring their progress from his observation post at the valley's edge. "Human Team Academy Control. Shows significant thermal anomaly in your area. Do you require assistance?" "Negative, Control," Taeho responded. "We're adapting our route to work around the new conditions. System performance is actually improved." There was a long pause before the professor responded. "Improved? How is that possible?" "Better soil composition in our alternate route," Miran explained. "The new path provides superior thermal absorption with reduced water requirements." Another pause. "You are treating this obstacle as an advantage?" "We're treating it as new information," Taeho corrected. "Our system was designed to be adaptable. Changes in conditions aren't failures, they're opportunities to optimize." Through their heat masks, the team could see other student groups dealing with the same lava vent in very different ways. A team of crystalline consortium students had stopped completely, waiting for the lava flow to subside. Their mathematical models apparently didn't account for real-time geological changes. The Valkyrie students were attempting to fly over the obstacle with their hover platforms, but the thermal updrafts were causing significant problems. One platform was already wobbling dangerously as its anti-gravity generators struggled with the heat load. "New route is ready," Hyjin announced. "Water flow established, thermal readings optimal. We can proceed." The human team resumed their crossing now, following a path that hadn't existed an hour earlier. Their mud channel system flowed smoothly through the natural depression, creating an even more effective cooling corridor than their original plan. "This is remarkable," Professor Veltar's voice came through the communication system again. "Your thermal readings in the new section are superior to your original projections. Adaptation in real time," SCO Jae-wook explained. "We built the system to take advantage of whatever conditions we encountered." As they continued deeper into the valley, the human team's confidence grew. Every challenge they encountered, new heat vents, unexpected terrain, equipment malfunctions, became an opportunity to demonstrate their system's flexibility. When the Jin's drone Delta malfunctioned due to heat damage, she quickly reprogrammed Drone Echo to handle double duty. When a small earthquake shifted their planned water source, Hyjin redirected flow through 2 alternate springs. When volcanic ash began affecting visibility, So Young used wind pattern analysis to predict clear paths forward. "You know what I realized?" Minsu said during a brief rest stop. They were now 30 kilometers into their crossing, farther than any other team had progressed. Other species designed solutions for perfect conditions. We design solutions for imperfect conditions. Because we live in imperfect conditions, Wujin added. Earth isn't a perfect world. Humans aren't a perfect species. We've always had to adapt and improvise. Taeho was studying the geological data ahead of them. The final 20 kilometers looked even more challenging than what they had already crossed. Higher temperatures, more active lava vents, and unstable terrain that could shift without warning. "Academy Control, this is Professor Veltar," they heard through the communication system. "The human team has achieved remarkable progress using their environmental manipulation system. Their approach appears to be not just viable, but superior to conventional methods." "Professor," came a response from Academy headquarters, "are you suggesting that primitive techniques are outperforming advanced technology?" There was a long pause before Veltar answered. "I'm suggesting that perhaps primitive and advanced are not the categories I thought they were." The team resumed their crossing as the afternoon sun made the volcanic landscape even more forbidding. Heat waves rose from every surface, creating a shimmering maze of thermal distortion. But their mud channel system continued to function perfectly, creating safe passage through terrain that should have been absolutely lethal. "Drone reconnaissance shows the extraction site," the Jin reported. "Distance, 18.7 kilometers. The terrain ahead is challenging." Taeho studied the drone's video feed. The final section of their journey would take them through the most geologically active part of the valley. Multiple lava flows converged in that area, creating a maze of superheated terrain that changed constantly. "Challenges or opportunities?" he asked his team. 7 voices responded in unison. "Opportunities." Behind them, they could see other student teams struggling with the same conditions they had already overcome. The Crystalline Consortium students were still waiting for the lava vent to subside. Several Valkyrie hover platforms had been forced to turn back due to thermal overload. Even some of the Zephyrian phase shifters were having problems with quantum interference from the high mineral content in the volcanic soil. But the human team pressed forward, their mud channel system adapting continuously to new conditions. They were no longer following a predetermined plan. They were creating solutions in real time, using the environment itself as their tool. "You know what's funny?" So Young said as they prepared for the final phase of their crossing. "Professor Veltar called our methods primitive, but we're the only team that's treating this environment as a system to understand and work with, rather than an obstacle to overcome." "Maybe that's what makes us primitive," Moran suggested with a laugh. We still remember that intelligence means working with what you have, not just overpowering what you don't want. The extraction site was within reach now. All they had to do was cross 18 more kilometers of the most dangerous terrain in known space. For other species, it would have been impossible. For humans, it was just another engineering problem. Waiting for a practical solution, the real test was about to begin. The extraction site lay just 18 kilometers ahead, but those final kilometers looked like a journey through hell itself. Multiple lava flows converged in the area, creating a constantly shifting maze of molten rock and superheated air. Thermal readings showed surface temperatures exceeding 1700 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt most metals instantly. Tejo stood at the edge of their current mud channel, studying the terrain ahead through heat-distorted air. The landscape changed even as he watched. New lava vents opened and closed. Existing flows changed direction without warning. Steam geysers erupted randomly from underground pressure systems. Seismic activity is increasing dramatically. S.L. J. Wook reported, studying his instruments with concern. Major geological instability ahead. The entire area is essentially one large active volcano. Kang Najin's drones were struggling to map viable routes. 3 machines had already been destroyed by sudden thermal flares. The remaining drones could only operate for short periods before the heat overwhelmed their protective coating. Visual. Reconnaissance is limited, she announced. Thermal interference is blocking most of our sensor readings. I can give you approximate topology, but conditions are changing too fast for detailed mapping. Jung Haijin was analyzing water source data, looking for ways to extend their cooling system into the most dangerous area. Underground water flow becomes unpredictable in this region, she said. Thermal pressure from below is disrupting normal spring patterns. We can't rely on consistent water sources. The situation looked impossible. Even their adaptive mud channel system had limits, and they were approaching those limits rapidly. Other student teams had already turned back or found alternate routes. That added days to their journey. Only the human team was still attempting a direct crossing. Options, Tejo said simply. Nandong Yuk ran thermal calculations on his tablet. Current mud cooling system can handle up to 800 degrees for extended periods. Brief exposure to 1200 degrees is survivable. Beyond that, He shook his head. Lee So-young was monitoring atmospheric conditions. Wind patterns are chaotic, no predictable thermal currents. Weather systems are being disrupted by the extreme ground heat. Mirror and examine soil samples from the edge of the danger zone. Mineral composition is changing rapidly due to fresh volcanic deposits. Our chemical additives will be less effective with this material. Park Min-soo studied the geological data one more time, looking for patterns others might have missed. The lava flows aren't completely random, he said slowly. There's an underlying structure. The oldest flows create channels that newer lava follows. If we can identify the stable patterns. Choi Woo-jin was analyzing thermal absorption properties of various soil samples. Some of these volcanic deposits have extraordinary heat resistance, he reported. Obsidian glass formations, pumice deposits, certain crystalline structures. The problem is getting enough volume to create effective cooling. Tejo listened to each report, processing the information and looking for connections. This was how human problem-solving worked: gather all available data, identify patterns, and find ways to combine different approaches into new solutions. What if we don't try to cool the entire route? He asked suddenly. The team looked at him with confusion. Our mud system works by creating continuous corridors of reduced temperature, he explained. But what if we created discontinuous safe zones instead? Thermal refuges connected by very short sprints through extreme heat? Haijin understood first. Island hopping, she said. Create small areas of maximum cooling, then move quickly between them. But the exposure time. Dong-hyuk began calculating. Even 30 seconds at 1700 degrees? Not 1700 degrees, Miran interrupted, suddenly excited. Look at these mineral samples. Some of this volcanic material has incredible thermal mass. If we could create concentrated cooling zones using the most effective materials, Jin was already reprogramming her drones. I can identify optimal locations for thermal refuges. Small areas with the best soil composition, maximum water access, optimal topology. Jae-wook studied the seismic data again. The geological activity follows cycles. Periods of high activity followed by brief calm phases. If we time our movements with the cycles. So Young was analyzing atmospheric data. Thermal pressure creates predictable wind patterns even in chaotic conditions. Brief windows of reduced air temperature occur regularly. The team worked frantically for the next hour, completely redesigning their approach. Instead of a continuous mud channel system, they would create a series of thermal refuges, small areas of maximum cooling where they could survive the extreme conditions. Between refuges, they would make rapid sprints through the superheated landscape. Academy Control, this is Professor Veltar, came a voice through their communication system. Human team, your current position shows you approaching thermal conditions beyond survivable limits. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Control, this is Human Team Leader, Taeho responded. We're implementing adaptive strategy. Modification, request permission to continue. Permission denied, came an immediate response from Academy headquarters. Thermal readings indicate certain fatality if you proceed. Return to safe distance immediately. There was a pause, then Professor Veltar's voice came through on a private channel. Human team, this is Veltar speaking personally, not as Academy Control. Your methods have been impressive, but the conditions ahead are beyond what any known technology can handle? Professor, Taho replied, with respect, no known technology has been designed to work with these conditions rather than against them. You believe your mud cooling system can function in 1700-degree environment? We believe our modified refuge system can create survivable microenvironments within a 1700-degree environment. Omiran corrected, different approach entirely. Another pause. Explain. The team quickly outlined their new strategy. Instead of trying to cool large areas, they would create small zones of maximum thermal protection. Each refuge would use the most effective cooling materials in concentrated applications. Between refuges, they would move quickly during optimal atmospheric windows. Theoretical basis is sound, Professor Veltar admitted after reviewing their calculations. But implementation requires perfect timing, perfect execution, and considerable luck. All problem-solving requires some luck, Taeho said. The question is whether you're prepared to take advantage of luck when it comes. Professor Veltar was quiet for several minutes. Finally, Academy Control, this is Veltar. I am authorizing the human team to proceed under experimental conditions protocol. Full documentation required. Veltar, this is Control. Are you certain? Thermal readings indicate. I am certain that these students have demonstrated problem-solving approaches that exceed our current theoretical models, the professor interrupted. If they believe they can adapt their system to these conditions, I believe they deserve the opportunity to try. The human team began implementing their refuge system immediately, using concentrated applications of their most effective cooling materials. They created the first thermal refuge at the edge of the extreme heat zone. The refuge was small, barely enough space for 8 people, but it provided a safe environment within the deadly landscape. First refuge operational, Hyjin reported. Core temperature, 450 degrees, survivable indefinitely. Atmospheric. Window approaching, So Young announced. Thermal pressure dropping. Estimated safe sprint time, 45 seconds. Second refuge location identified, the Jin's drones reported. Distance, 300 meters. Optimal soil composition confirmed. The team prepared for their first sprint through the extreme heat zone. They would have less than a minute to cross 300 meters of terrain hot enough to kill them instantly. Their basic heat suits would provide minimal protection. Success depended entirely on perfect timing and flawless execution. Atmospheric window opening, So Young called out. Thermal readings dropping to manageable levels. Go, Tejo said simply. 8 humans sprinted across the hellish landscape, racing between their carefully prepared refuges. The heat was overwhelming even during the optimal window. Their suits glowed red from thermal absorption. The air itself seemed to burn in their lungs, but they reached the second refuge with seconds to spare. Refuge 2 operational, Dongyuk gasped as they collapsed into the small protected zone. System holding. Temperature stable? From his observation post, Professor Veltar watched in amazement as the human team successfully navigated terrain that should have been absolutely lethal. Their refuge system was working perfectly, creating islands of survival in an ocean of death. Academy Control, he announced. The human team has successfully crossed into the extreme thermal zone using their adaptive environmental manipulation system. This approach appears to be not just viable, but potentially superior to any previously known method. The extraction site was now within reach. Only 12 more kilometers of the most dangerous terrain in known space. For the human team, it was just another engineering challenge, difficult, dangerous, but entirely solvable with the right approach and careful execution. The impossible was becoming possible, one refuge at a time. 10 kilometers from the extraction site, disaster struck without warning. A massive seismic event shook the entire valley, opening new lava vents in every direction. The carefully mapped refuge system that had carried them this far suddenly became useless as molten rock erupted from the ground beneath their planned routes. Seismic magnitude 7.3, SEO J. Wilk shouted over the rumbling ground. Multiple new thermal sources opening. Surface temperature rising rapidly across all sectors. The refuge where they had taken shelter was holding, but barely. Steam geysers erupted around them as underground water systems were disrupted by the earthquake. Their cooling system was being overwhelmed by the sudden increase in thermal input. Refuge temperature rising, Nam Dong-hyuk reported, sweat streaming down his face despite their protection systems. 600 degrees and climbing. System failure in approximately 20 minutes. Kangjin's remaining drones were struggling to function in the chaos. Thermal interference was blocking most sensor readings, and several machines had already been destroyed by flying volcanic debris. Limited visual data available, she announced. Most of our planned routes are now blocked by active lava flows. Yong Haijin was frantically working to maintain water flow to their refuge system, but the earthquake had disrupted underground spring patterns. Water pressure dropping rapidly, she called out. Primary cooling system compromised. The situation looked hopeless. They were trapped in a small safe zone surrounded by lethal conditions that were getting worse by the minute. Their planned routes were blocked, their cooling system was failing, and they were still 10 kilometers from their objective. Any reasonable team would have activated emergency evacuation protocols. Any logical analysis would have concluded that the mission was impossible to complete. But humans had never been particularly reasonable or logical when faced with impossible situations. Options, Tejo said calmly, as if they were discussing a minor technical problem rather than immediate mortal danger. Oh. Miran was analyzing the chemical composition of volcanic debris that had landed near their refuge. These fresh volcanic deposits have different properties, she reported. Higher silicate content, different crystal structure. If we could process them quickly. Park Min-soo was studying the new topology created by the earthquake. The seismic activity created new depressions and channels. Some of them connect to areas we hadn't considered before. Choi Woo-jin examined samples of the altered soil around their refuge. Thermal properties have changed dramatically. Some materials are actually better than what we were using before. Others are completely useless. Lee So-young was monitoring atmospheric changes caused by the massive volcanic eruption. Wind patterns are chaotic, but there are new thermal currents we could potentially use. The atmospheric disturbance is creating temporary cool zones in unexpected places. Tejo processed all the information rapidly. The earthquake had destroyed their planned approach, but it had also created new possibilities. Fresh volcanic material with different properties, new geological features that might provide better routes, atmospheric disturbances that could be advantageous if properly understood. What if we're thinking about this wrong? He asked suddenly. The team looked at him through the shimmering heat of their failing refuge. We've been treating the volcanic activity as an obstacle to overcome, he continued. But what if it's a resource to use? The lava is 1700 degrees, Dong Hyuk pointed out. How is that a resource? Not the lava itself, Taeho explained. The system that produces it. Look at the patterns. New vents open in predictable locations based on underground pressure. Thermal currents follow geological structures. Even the chaos follows rules. SCO Jae-wook understood first. You want to use the volcanic system itself as our cooling mechanism. The underground water systems are being disrupted, but they're also being redirected. Haijin added, excitement growing in her voice. New spring activity in areas that were previously dry? And the fresh volcanic deposits have properties we haven't even tested yet, Miran said. Already pulling analysis equipment from her pack. The Jin was reprogramming her surviving drones for a completely different reconnaissance mission. I can map the new geological features, identify thermal current patterns, locate fresh water sources. The team worked with desperate efficiency, completely redesigning their approach while their current refuge slowly failed around them. Instead of fighting the volcanic chaos, they would work with it. Instead of avoiding the new lava flows, they would use the patterns those flows created. Fresh volcanic glass has incredible thermal mass, Wu Jin reported after testing samples. Brief exposure to extreme heat actually improves its cooling properties. New atmospheric currents are creating predictable cool zones, So Young announced. Duration is short, but timing is regular. Underground water is being forced to the surface in multiple new locations, Haijin added. Higher mineral content, better cooling properties than our original sources. Within an hour, they had developed an entirely new strategy. They would use the volcanic eruption's own energy patterns to create a dynamic cooling system that moved and adapted with the changing conditions. Instead of static refuges, they would create mobile cool zones that followed the natural rhythm of the geological chaos. Academy Control, this is Human Team, Taeho announced. We're implementing emergency adaptation protocol, proceeding to extraction site using modified environmental integration approach. Professor Valtar's voice came through immediately. Human Team, thermal readings indicate impossible survival conditions in your area. Emergency evacuation teams are being dispatched. Control, evacuation is not necessary, Omiran responded. We've adapted our system to work with current geological conditions. The volcanic activity is actually providing advantages we didn't have before. There was a long pause. Did you say the volcanic eruption is providing advantages? Correct, Taeho confirmed. Fresh thermal mass materials, new water sources, predictable atmospheric cooling patterns. The chaos is following natural laws we can work with. Another pause, longer this time. Human Team. Are you treating a magnitude 7 earthquake and major volcanic eruption as an improvement to your working conditions? We're treating it as new information, Iseo Jae-wook replied. Our system was designed to adapt to changing environmental conditions. These are just very dramatic changes. From his observation post, Professor Valtar watched as the human team abandoned their failing refuge and began moving through terrain that his instruments insisted was absolutely lethal. But their adapted cooling system was working, creating safe passage through conditions that exceeded all known survival parameters. This is unprecedented, he announced to Academy Control. The human team is successfully navigating Class 10 thermal conditions using environmental manipulation techniques that appear to improve performance under increased stress. That's impossible, came the response from headquarters. I am observing it directly, Professor Valtar replied. Their approach is not just surviving extreme conditions, it is thriving in them. The human team pressed forward through the geological chaos, their new system creating mobile safe zones that moved with the natural rhythm of the volcanic eruption. Each new obstacle became an opportunity to optimize their approach further. When fresh lava blocked their path, they used its thermal patterns to predict optimal cooling zones. When steam explosions disrupted their water sources, they redirected flow through newly created channels. When volcanic ash reduced visibility, they navigated by thermal gradients and seismic patterns. You know what's funny? So Young said during a brief rest in one of their mobile refuges. Other species would look at this situation and see disaster. We look at it and see a more efficient system. Maybe that's why we're still here, Minsu replied. We've never had the luxury of perfect conditions. We learned to find advantages in chaos. The extraction site was now only 5 kilometers away. The volcanic eruption that had threatened to end their mission was instead carrying them toward success faster than their original plan would have managed. Behind them, emergency evacuation teams had arrived to rescue a human team that no longer needed rescuing. Ahead of them, the extraction site waited beyond terrain that every other species considered impossible to cross. For humans, it was just another day at the office, dangerous, unpredictable, and absolutely fascinating in its possibilities. The extraction site appeared through the volcanic haze like a mirage, a cluster of quantum-locked buildings surrounded by mining equipment, all designed to withstand the extreme conditions of Pyroclastic Valley. What had seemed impossible just days ago was now within reach, thanks to a volcanic eruption that had actually made their journey easier. Target acquired, Kang De-jin announced as her final drone transmitted visual data. Distance, 2.3 kilometers. No other student teams visible in the area. The human team had not only survived the crossing that other species considered impossible, they had completed it faster than anyone had projected. Their adaptive environmental manipulation system had turned every obstacle into an advantage, every crisis into an opportunity for optimization. Thermal readings at the extraction site are elevated but manageable, Nam Dong-hyuk reported. The quantum-locked barriers are generating their own cooling field. Once we reach the perimeter, environmental conditions become survivable without our cooling system. Jung Haijin was already planning their final approach. We can extend our mobile refuge system to within 50 meters of the facility. From there, it's a simple sprint across stable ground. But Taeho was studying something else entirely. The extraction site wasn't just a destination. It was a sophisticated mining operation with its own environmental control systems. Systems that other student teams would need to understand and operate when they eventually arrived. Look at the facility design, he said, pointing toward the complex. Those are standard galactic mining protocols. Thermal barriers, atmospheric processors, quantum-locked storage systems. Oh, Mirren understood immediately. Designed for species with advanced technology and environmental suits. They're assuming everyone who reaches this point will have sophisticated equipment. CO Jae-wook was analyzing the geological data around the facility. The extraction operation itself is creating thermal disturbances. Standard approach would be to use the facility's built-in environmental controls. Park Min-soo studied the building layouts through his scope. But what if the facility systems are designed for normal volcanic conditions, not the extreme activity we've been dealing with? Choi Woo-jin was already testing soil samples from the extraction site perimeter. The mineral deposits here are extraordinary. Concentrated rare earth elements, crystalline formations, thermal absorption materials that exceed anything we've encountered. Lee So-young monitored atmospheric conditions around the facility. The quantum barriers are creating interesting interactions with the volcanic environment. Thermal currents, pressure variations, localized weather patterns. The team realized they were looking at more than just a test completion. The extraction site was a perfect laboratory for demonstrating the full potential of their environmental manipulation approach. Instead of simply collecting their required sample and leaving, they could optimize the entire facility's performance. Academy Control, this is Human Team, Taeho announced. We have reached the extraction site. Beginning sample collection procedures. Professor Valtar's voice came through immediately, filled with amazement. Human team, confirm your position. Our instruments show you have completed the crossing in 18 hours and 37 minutes. Current record for this route is 42 hours. Confirmed, Control. The volcanic activity provided optimal conditions for our environmental manipulation system. Faster completion was an unexpected benefit. Faster completion? Professor Valtar repeated. You used a major geological disaster to improve your travel time? We used available resources efficiently, Omiran corrected. The volcanic eruption created thermal patterns and water sources that were superior to baseline conditions. As the team approached the facility's quantum-locked entrance, they encountered their first real technical challenge. The security system was designed for students using advanced equipment, environmental suits with electronic signatures, hover platforms with standard identification codes, force field generators with Academy authorization protocols. The human team had none of these things. They had basic heat protection, improvised cooling systems, and ingenuity. Standard entry protocols require equipment we don't possess, the Jin observed, studying the facility's security scanner. Then we don't use standard protocols? Teho replied simply. The quantum locks were sophisticated, but they followed logical patterns. The facility needed to distinguish between authorized students and random environmental hazards. The system looked for specific technological signatures that indicated intelligent, educated users. But intelligence and education didn't require specific technologies. They required understanding of principles and creative application of available resources. The quantum locks respond to demonstration of advanced scientific knowledge, Hyjin observed after studying the system specifications. Problem-solving ability, not equipment sophistication. The team approached the challenge methodically. Instead of trying to simulate the technological signatures the system expected, they demonstrated their scientific competence directly. They solved complex equations using volcanic soil as a writing surface. They created precise measurements using improvised tools. They demonstrated understanding of quantum mechanics using nothing but basic mathematics and logical reasoning. The facilities. Artificial intelligence was initially confused. The security protocols had never encountered users who demonstrated advanced scientific knowledge without corresponding advanced equipment. But the AI was designed to recognize intelligence in any form, and the human approach clearly indicated high-level scientific competence. Access granted, the facility announced in multiple languages. Welcome, students. Please proceed to sample collection area. Inside the facility, conditions were more comfortable but no less challenging. The extraction equipment was designed for species with various physiological requirements. Control interfaces varied between electromagnetic, psionic, and quantum mechanical activation methods. Most assumed users would have species-specific adaptations or technological augmentations, but the human team had something else: the ability to understand and adapt to unfamiliar systems quickly. They studied each piece of equipment carefully, analyzed its function and operating principles, and found ways to operate it effectively with their available capabilities. Sample extraction requires precise thermal regulation, Dongyuk observed, studying the mining equipment. The rare minerals are temperature-sensitive. Standard protocols assume species with natural thermal resistance or advanced environmental suits. But thermal regulation is exactly what we've been doing for the past 20 hours, Miran pointed out. We just need to adapt our cooling system to work on a smaller scale. Within an hour, they had successfully collected their required samples, using a modified version of their mud cooling system. The technique was so effective that they were able to extract higher quality specimens than the standard protocols typically produced. Academy Control, this is Human Team, Teho announced. Sample collection complete. Specimens exceed minimum quality requirements. Preparing for return journey. Human Team, this is Professor Valtar. Your sample extraction efficiency is remarkable. Standard collection time at this facility is 6 to 8 hours. You completed the process in under 2 hours. The facility equipment works better when properly cooled, Wujin explained. Our environmental manipulation system prevented thermal degradation of the extraction process. Professor Veltar was quiet for several minutes. Finally, human team, Academy Control requests that you document your methods completely. Your approach appears to represent a fundamental advancement in extreme environment operations. As they prepared for the return journey, the human team realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. They had not only completed an impossible crossing, they had done it faster and more efficiently than anyone had thought possible. Their environmental manipulation system had turned every challenge into an advantage. More importantly, they had demonstrated that the most advanced solutions were often the simplest ones, working with natural systems rather than fighting against them, adapting to changing conditions rather than trying to control them, using intelligence and creativity rather than relying on expensive technology. Ready for return journey, Teho announced to his team. Same route, same system, same principles, Haijin corrected. But conditions have changed again. We'll adapt as we go. Behind them, the extraction facility continued its automated operations, now running more efficiently thanks to their thermal optimization. Ahead of them, Pyroclastic Valley waited with new challenges and new opportunities for the human team. It was exactly what they expected, another chance to prove that the most primitive approaches were often the most sophisticated ones. 3 months after the Pyroclastic Valley crossing, the Academy's main auditorium was packed with students and faculty from across the galaxy. The event was unprecedented, a formal ceremony to honor what the Academy Council was calling the most significant advancement in extreme environment engineering in over a century. Professor Veltar stood at the podium, his crystalline form refracting the auditorium lights into patterns of rainbow brilliance. But today, those patterns seemed different somehow, warmer, more complex, as if his understanding of light itself had evolved. When I first observed the human approach to crossing Pyroclastic Valley, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, I dismissed it as primitive. I was wrong. I was profoundly, fundamentally wrong. In the front, Ro Kim Tae-ho and his 7 teammates sat quietly. They wore the formal Academy Honors uniform, but they looked slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. Success had come with responsibilities they hadn't expected. The humans accomplished something that our most advanced theories suggested was impossible, Professor Veltar continued. They completed a 50-kilometer crossing of Class 10 thermal terrain in 18 hours and 37 minutes. They did it using what I foolishly called primitive methods. They did it without hover technology, without force fields, without environmental suits rated for extreme conditions. The auditorium was completely silent. Students from dozens of species listened as one of the galaxy's most respected engineering professors publicly acknowledged that his fundamental assumptions had been wrong. But their achievement was not simply about speed or efficiency, Professor Veltar said. It was about philosophy, about the difference between conquering an environment and working with it, about the difference between using technology to overpower natural forces and using intelligence to cooperate with them. Behind him, a holographic display showed footage from the crossing. The human team's mud channel system flowing across the volcanic landscape, adapting in real time to changing conditions, turning every obstacle into an opportunity for optimization. The mud cooling system they developed has now been adopted by 17 different star systems for extreme environment operations, Professor Veltar announced. The Crystalline Consortium has requested full technology transfer rights. The Valkyrie Military Corps wants to implement their adaptive techniques for emergency operations. The Zephyrian Science Academy has begun teaching their environmental integration methods as standard curriculum. Yoon Haeri leaned over to whisper to Taeho, Did you ever imagine we'd be sitting here listening to aliens analyze our homework project? Taeho smiled but said nothing. He was thinking about his grandmother's stories, about Korean farmers who learned to work with monsoons instead of fighting them, about fishermen who read ocean currents like books, about engineers who built with nature rather than against it. But the most significant impact, Professor Veltar continued, has been on our understanding of intelligence itself. We assumed that advanced civilizations would develop beyond the need to manipulate physical environments directly. We thought that true sophistication meant transcending material limitations through technology. The professor's crystal body flickered with complex light patterns as he paused to gather his thoughts. The humans showed us that the opposite is true. The most advanced approach is not to transcend environmental challenges, but to understand them so completely that you can work with them as partners rather than obstacles. In the audience, students from various species were taking notes, recording the lecture, trying to understand how their fundamental assumptions about intelligence and progress had been so thoroughly challenged by 8 Korean engineering students. With shovels and mud, Academy Control has established a new department, Professor Veltar announced. The Human Environmental Integration Institute, dedicated to studying and teaching what we now recognize as some of the most sophisticated engineering principles in known space. Lee So-young nudged Park Min-soo. Did he just say our mud channels are sophisticated engineering? I think he said they're some of the most sophisticated engineering principles in known space, Min-soo whispered back. Professor Veltar gestured toward the human team. These students will be leading the new institute. Their first project will be training other species in what we are calling adaptive environmental cooperation, the art of working with natural systems rather than overpowering them. Jung Haijin looked genuinely surprised. We're going to teach aliens how to dig ditches? We're going to teach them how to think. Oh, Miran corrected softly. The ceremony continued with formal presentations of various honors and awards, the Academy's highest recognition for theoretical advancement, the Galactic Engineering Council's prize for practical innovation, the Impossible Solutions Award reserved for achievements that fundamentally challenge accepted wisdom, but the moment that meant the most to the human team came when Professor Veltar made a personal statement. I spent decades believing that my species' crystalline nature made us superior to carbon-based life forms. He said, his voice quieter now, more personal. I thought our ability to withstand extreme temperatures without technological assistance made us more advanced than humans who needed tools and techniques to survive. His crystal form seemed to pulse with a softer light. I failed to understand that needing tools and techniques meant humans had developed something my species never required: the ability to adapt, to improvise, to find solutions where none seemed to exist. We never needed to learn these skills, because our natural abilities made them unnecessary. But those skills are what true intelligence looks like. The professor turned to look directly at the human team. You taught me that primitive and advanced are not opposites. They are different approaches to the same goal, survival and prosperity in a challenging universe. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the one that appears most primitive to those who have forgotten how to think creatively. After the ceremony, as students and faculty dispersed throughout the Academy campus, the human team found themselves surrounded by others wanting to understand their approach. Crystalline Consortium students asked detailed questions about thermal dynamics. Valkyrie engineers wanted to know about adaptive system design. Zephyrian scientists inquired about environmental integration theory, but the question that came up most often was simpler: how did you know it would work? We didn't, Tejo answered honestly every time. We just knew that giving up wasn't an option, so we had to find a way to make it work. 6 months later, the Human Environmental Integration Institute had trained over 300 students from 47 different species. The techniques developed for crossing Pyroclastic Valley were being used for disaster relief operations, extreme environment colonization, and resource extraction in previously impossible locations. Professor Veltar had become the Institute's most enthusiastic supporter, spending his time learning human problem-solving approaches and teaching them to other species. His most popular course was titled When Simple Solutions Surpass Complex Technology. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The Academy had begun teaching that intelligence wasn't about having the most advanced technology or the most sophisticated theoretical knowledge. Intelligence was about the ability to look at any situation, no matter how impossible it seemed, and find a way to work with it rather than against it. The mud channels across Pyroclastic Valley continued to operate perfectly, creating a permanent, safe passage through terrain that had once been considered absolutely impassable. Travelers from across the galaxy came to see the route,